our healthcare system is just a phenomenal example of humans creating a disaster of complexity and inefficiency. The list prices have gone up and up and up for the past several years. In any market, typically ask, well, what's the price of something? In the healthcare industry, one of the things that makes it so challenging to understand is that there isn't one price. In this case, we've already talked about, 4 different prices: the wholesaler price, the pharmacy price, the net price, the rebate, the list price. Insurance companies, by and large, are sort of on the right side of history right now. Like, they want, in most cases, to figure out how to deliver care efficiently, but their economic interest may in fact be to grow the expense of healthcare, which is unfortunate.
You've had some obviously big names in investing before. Now, with the emphasis you've had in the biotech space, we've also had a number of very exciting investments in your portfolio. It's quite impressive just on the healthcare biotech side as well, which leads to this article that you put up last week on Medium, The Paradox of Pricing. I think this is the first part of a promised multiple series of articles. And what was prompted by, I'll give a little bit of overview, but I want you to go deeper into this, but prompted by a lot of the debates that are happening in the political spectrum here about what to do with healthcare, what to do with drug pricing. And you are able to just go much deeper into the nuances of it than you're going to be able to catch on any kind of, video snippet or live debate where it's all just about kind of beating everyone up. But you really dig into the nuance between, for example, the difference between list price, net price, the role of regulation with the ACA, also known as Obamacare, and how all of these different systems are kind of codependent upon one another, and this tension that is just kind of grinding everyone to basically not make any material progress. That's my general overview without actually describing much about what you've actually said. But why don't you take us into, some of the discussion points, and then I want to start to unravel this layer by layer and just go much deeper into it, because it's a very important problem.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the reason I wrote that article and the reason I continue to write is that it helps me straighten out what I've learned as I go around talking to smart people and trying to understand our healthcare system. And one of the challenges in looking at the US healthcare system is that it's just so big that it's really difficult, even when you do it for a living, to understand what the heck is going on. And so it has taken me years to even have a working understanding of how drugs are priced, how hospitals get paid, this sort of thing. And honestly, part of why I write something like this is when you put that out in the world, you hear back from a lot of people who will even correct or add layers of complexity to what you wrote. So I just want to preface what I'm going to say with a caution that I almost certainly am getting some things wrong. And I welcome feedback from your guys' viewers, because I'm always continuing to better understand how this crazy system we got works. So that's the first point. The second point I want to make is that in healthcare, there's a good friend of mine who basically says there are man-made problems and there are science problems. And most of the time in my investing, I'm really focused on the science problems. Biology is really complicated. Diseases like cancer and heart disease, neurodegeneration, are really complicated, and we try to solve those through scientific approaches. In other words, if we can get a technology that's able to intervene in those diseases, that's a great way to solve them. But yet, you have that other class of problems, which are man-made problems. And our healthcare system is just a phenomenal example of humans creating a disaster of complexity and inefficiency. And it's not like there was one bad guy or girl who did it. It's evolved over in the United States, a couple hundred years. And what really prompted me to write this article was I was watching the Democratic primary debates. And what I heard over and over again was very thoughtful, smart politicians demonizing pharmaceutical companies and insurance companies. And this is not an uncommon message. What you hear is those greedy, evil pharma companies or those greedy, evil insurance companies. And they're easy to blame because, who loves their health insurance company? I mean, it's kind of just this part of your life that you wish you didn't have to spend money on. And then we hear at the same time these headlines about drugs coming out that cost $1 million per dose or $2 million per dose. Everyone, was really appalled by the Martin Shkreli, fiasco a couple years ago. And if you remember, what he was doing was buying these drug companies, buying these drugs that were treating very rare diseases. And then because he had a monopoly, he was just jacking the prices up through the roof to the point where patients couldn't afford these things. So what I wanted to do was not necessarily let anyone off the hook for bad behavior. I mean, big companies do all kinds of bad stuff, all kinds of big companies, and that includes drug companies and insurance companies. But I wanted to try and reveal some of the nuance and complexity that drives why our drugs seem to be so expensive. So the first thing I want to say, which I didn't actually include in the article, I will in the next article, is that of the 3.5 trillion-ish that we spend on healthcare, we only spend about 12 to 15% of that on drugs. And the drugs that we have are responsible for many of us being alive today. I mean, just take antibiotics as one class of drugs, and they're responsible for one of the greatest creations of human life in history. I mean, so many people used to die just from bacterial infections. So we have the drug industry to thank for a lot of the benefits we've harvested in healthcare. And then you also have, of course, these breakthrough drugs, like some of the ones that cost $1 million that have come out in the past few years. And part of why those drugs are so expensive is because, one, they're very expensive to develop and get to the market. And second, in some cases, they're very expensive to manufacture, hundreds of thousands of dollars per patient even. But at the same time, you've had over the past few years this seeming increase in the prices that are charged for drugs like insulin that have been around for a long time, that are sort of a commodity. And those are the ones that have really created some problems for patients who, because of high drug prices, are even not taking the drugs they need to stay alive because of that cost issue. So I really wanted to explain just the basics of how this works. And if you want me to, I can jump into those basics.
Yeah, let's jump on in.
Okay, so this is old news for people who are in the pharmaceutical industry, but that's not most of us. And that's why I really wanted to explain just one part of it as simply as I could. And that is something you referred to earlier, which is that we have, at the basic level, two prices for drugs. On the one hand, we have the quote unquote list price. And that you could think of, that's the price on the box. When you pay at the pharmacy, that's the price on the receipt. That's the price that's kind of like the manufacturer's suggested retail price, the MSRP. And that price is what the pharmacy will charge when you go and get the drug. Now, there's another price, which is called the net price. And the net price is a little more complicated to get to. And to talk about the net price, we first have to talk about what happens when you buy that drug. So let's start from the factory. This big pharmaceutical company has made a pill, and they now sell it to a wholesale distributor. That distributor, say the drug has an MSRP of $100, a list price of $100. Well, they might be selling that drug to the wholesaler for, call it, $85. And now the pharmacy is going to buy that drug for $90. So now the pharmacy, you go into Walgreens, Walgreens has bought that drug for $95. Now they've got it sitting on their shelf. And so the wholesaler obviously makes a $5 margin. And now Walgreens, when you walk in, is going to ask you, Alex, who's your insurance company? And you're going to say it's, Blue Cross. And so your pharmacy is going to call Blue Cross. Sometimes they even pick up the phone and call them, and they're going to see what the negotiated price is for your insurance plan. And that price may be, $95. So the list price in theory is going to come down to $95 because you've got an insurance plan that calls it $95. So the pharmacy is going to bill your insurance company the $95, and then they're going to give you the drug. And if it were that simple, this would be very straightforward. But what's happening on the back end is that your insurance company has actually negotiated with that pharmaceutical company a rebate. The rebate might be $50. So as soon as your insurance company has paid for that drug, remember, they're giving the $95 to the pharmacy. So now the pharmacy has made a $5 profit. The wholesaler has made a $5 profit, and your insurance company is out $95, but now they're going to get $50 back from the manufacturer of the drug. So their net price is $45. And as you can tell, there's a big gap between the quote unquote list price here, we can say 95, and the net price of 45. Now, what has been going on is that the list prices have gone up and up and up for the past several years. And what I tried to explain in the article is that the reason they're going up is because a lot of people in this system are basically addicted to these rebates for business reasons. And so your insurance company would rather get a big rebate than they would just pay $45. In other words, they would prefer that the list price is high, but the net price is low, than that the net price were just low. So that's
and you actually explained it's not just the pharmacy, which is there's a fancy word called PBM, pharmacy benefit manager, which I'm sure we'll talk about more. But you also were giving examples about HR departments that are when you have a self-insured plan from an employer, and now you are also able to kind of negotiate rebate amounts and these kinds of things. And what you're basically saying was there's a lot of vested interest on the business side of the industry for multiple players that argue that they create value in the face of a market that has a complete lack of pricing transparency. Would you agree with that roughly?
I would, and I would just add to it that this is why I'm writing this series of articles, because you would, in any market, typically ask, well, what's the price of something? In the healthcare industry, one of the things that makes it so challenging to understand is that there isn't one price. In this case, we've already talked about, 4 different prices: the wholesaler price, the pharmacy price, the net price, the rebate, the list price. And so it's very hard to figure out what anything costs because of all these different prices.
Mm-hmm. You were also saying that another vested interest is complying with the law, with Obamacare, about how you can only have a certain amount of your expenses be allocated to different pockets. And so by having higher list prices, it makes it easier to basically comply with the Obamacare law.
They've got to spend 80% of premiums taken in basically on healthcare for people. So if they're spending more on the list price for a drug, then it's easier to comply with that 80% ratio, even if they then get stuff back in rebates. Is that roughly right, DA?
Yeah, the issue is that if you're an insurance company, you collect $1 million from the people you insure. Under Obamacare, you are required to spend 80% of that premium on covering those people's healthcare costs. And as I point out in the article, the reason they put this in Obamacare was before that, you had insurance companies who were going after these crazy margins. And so that policy attempted to cap the margin, the profit margin that an insurance company could generate. Now, it creates many perverse incentives. One of those incentives is, of course, if you want your 20% to be bigger, what do? Well, you want all of the costs to be higher. because the insurance companies, are capped on a percent basis, not a total absolute cost basis. And so that's the insurance companies by and large are sort of on the right side of history right now. Like they want, in most cases, to figure out how to deliver care efficiently, but their economic interest may in fact be to grow the expense of healthcare, which is unfortunate.
Hi, this is Alex from Winner Take All. Thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the content. Feel free to leave a comment, ask us questions, and definitely make sure to join us on our next live stream.